Hello, everyone. My name is Jeanette Southwood, and I'm Vice President, Corporate Affairs and Strategic Partnerships for Engineers Canada, and I'm an engineer. Happy National Engineering Month, and happy Professional Engineers Day in Ontario. Engineers Canada is the national organization of the 12 engineering regulators in Canada who license the more than 300,000 members of the engineering profession in Canada. On behalf of Engineers Canada, the national voice of the engineering profession, it is our pleasure to participate in this event that has been organized by the Ontario Society of Professional Engineers to kick off this year's annual celebration. National Engineering Month is Canada's largest celebration of engineering excellence. Presented by Engineers Canada, National Engineering Month revolves around the theme, "There's a place for you in engineering," which celebrates the diversity of thought, opportunities, and people that make up the engineering profession, and demonstrates that there's a place for everyone in engineering. Engineers Canada partners and works closely with many leading organizations that share our vision for a diverse, strong, and inclusive engineering profession and an engineering culture in Canada. The Ontario Society of Professional Engineers is one of those organizations representing and advocating on behalf of its members who are current and future engineers across Ontario. It is with pleasure that I introduce Sandro Peruzza, the CEO of the Ontario Society of Professional Engineers. Over to you, Sandro.
Thank you, Jeanette. It's great seeing you, and it's truly wonderful to partner with Engineers Canada on National Engineering Month 2022. Good evening, everyone. My name is Sandro Peruzza, CEO at OSPE, the Ontario Society of Professional Engineers. Thank you for joining us at this year's National Engineering Month Ontario kickoff event. Before we begin, I'd like to take a moment to acknowledge that I'm coming to you from Toronto, which is the dish with one spoon territory. We respectfully acknowledge the past and present traditional stewards of this land and the unique role they play in the life of this region. Toronto is on a traditional territory of the Anishinaabe, the Haudenosaunee, and the Wendat peoples, and is covered by Treaty 13 of the Mississaugas of the Credit First Nation. We pay our respects to their elders past, present, and emerging. As settlers, we are grateful for the opportunity to live, work, and play in this territory. So today is March 1st. Not only are we kicking off the first day of National Engineering Month, we're also celebrating P.Eng Day in Ontario. So P.Eng Day started in 2018 when OSPE called for the formal recognition from the Legislative Assembly of Ontario that every March 1st be declared Professional Engineers Day. P.Eng Day recognizes the vital role that professional engineers play in building and safeguarding our province and the environment. So once again, happy P.Eng Day to all the amazing engineers across Ontario and right across Canada. I hope you enjoy the many events we have organized this entire month. So now I'd like to introduce my friend and the Senior Dean of the Faculty of Applied Sciences and Technology at Humber College, Dr. Farzad Reghani, Professional Engineer. Farzad, welcome.
Good evening, everyone, and thank you, Sandro, for the warm welcome. I am Dr. Farzad Reghani, and as a professional engineer and fellow engineer of Canada, I wish you a happy P.Eng Day as we kick off National Engineering Month with a bold and insightful conversation during the annual month-long tribute to the engineering. Humber College and Faculty of Applied Sciences and Technology is a proud partner of National Engineering Month, and I am honored to participate in this year's kickoff event that will explore the future of the P.Eng. This professional engineering designation represents the highest standard of the engineering knowledge, experience, and professionalism in Canada. Once an individual earns this designation, not only do they have the honor to place P.Eng at the end of their name, but they have now taken on the responsibility to help make the world safer, healthier, and more equitable. You see, at the heart of the engineer is a caring professional who is driven and committed to the advancement of civilization and help increase the quality of the life from healthcare to transportation to our workplace and home. We bring a caring sense of the humanity by defining problems and finding solutions to improve the quality of our everyday lives. The challenges facing engineering today are not those of isolated locales, but of the planet as a whole and as one community. We must work together to meet these challenges, and as an educator, we take our role very seriously. We are accountable for providing engineering graduates with a set of skills and competency to prepare them for their engineering profession so that they can positively contribute to our society and help make the world not only a more technologically advanced and connected place, but also more suitable, safe, healthy, and joyful world. Enhancing the joy of the living remains the top priority of engineering innovation, and today's panel includes representatives and educators that are committed to developing the next generation of engineers. Today, they will discuss how they are working to modernize regulations in their own provinces and what shared goals and professionals can work toward in the face of engineering technology. To navigate this dynamic, high-impact panel discussion, we turn to the best to moderate this important kickoff event. P.Eng is a journalist, author, and documentary producer. He has been the anchor of the TVO flagship current affairs program, The Agenda with P.Eng since 2006. A best-selling author, P.Eng has written 7 books, the most recent being Bill Davis, Nation Builder, and Not So Bland After All. He has also produced several feature-length documentaries for TVO, including the award-winning Return to the Warsaw Ghetto. P.Eng has served as the moderator of the multiple election debate, both at the federal and provincial levels, and as a moderator of the National Engineering Month panel discussion. He is the officer of the Order of Canada and has been invested into the Order of Ontario. It is my honor to welcome P.Eng.
Farzad, thank you for that introduction. And I'm so glad you mentioned the book I wrote about Bill Davis because it's timely. 51 years ago today, Bill Davis was sworn in as Ontario's 18th Premier. And the current Ontario government, Lisa MacLeod, the Minister of Culture, made an announcement this morning in Brampton, which of course was Mr. Davis's hometown, in which she offered some funding for a statue that the city of Brampton wants to put up to Bill Davis, because I guess he is the most famous person to come out of Brampton, Ontario, although maybe the fans of Alessia Cara might give me a hard time about that one. But anyway, so thank you, Farzad, for mentioning Bill Davis, because well, we lost him last summer, and I miss him every day. And I had such a joy writing that book about him. And I'm happy to remember that 51 years ago today, he became a very young 41-year-old premier, but he did a pretty good job. I also, Farzad, really like those words: safer, healthier, and more equitable. That sounds like a great mission statement to propel our discussion for this evening. And to help us do that, I do want to welcome Mark Frayne from the Ontario Society of Professional Engineers, Christian Bellini from Professional Engineers Ontario, Heidi Yang, who's a geoscientist joining us from British Columbia tonight, and Jay Nagendran from APEGA, who's also joining us this evening. And why don't we start with a nice, and I'm going to make this admonition to our guests off the top here, and I do this every time I host the agenda as well. I say, I know you could give me a 20-minute answer to the first question, but if you do, we'll have no time for question 2 or anything else. So this is a scene setter. just give me a nice sort of top of mind thought. And Heidi, why don't you start us off? Your vision for the future of the engineering license. What comes to mind?
Great, thanks, Steve. And I'm going to give you my view of that. But firstly, I need to correct you. I'm not a geologist. I'm a professional engineer. So just wanting to state that first. So my vision for the future of the engineering license is that it is trusted, valued, and understood. Trust, because trust is at the core of all that we do as engineers, whether we're fresh out of university, 30 years into our careers, we carry with us this inherent promise to keep the public safe. We need to ensure that the engineering license is valued because being granted an engineering license holds with it obligations for registrants, and that's engineering professionals, and in our case in BC, also geoscience professionals, to act ethically and uphold strong standards in their work. And with that, then the public can trust, value, and expect a certain level of standard when engaging with people and companies that have an engineering license. So when licensed engineers do their job well, the public is protected. When engineering regulators do their job well, the public is protected. But perhaps the most challenging part of all of that is helping the public understand what that is. What is an engineering license, when one is needed and why, and how the role of the regulator is to ensure that the license and the professional and ethical obligations that come with it are upheld to protect the public and to keep them safe. And so what we need to do is we need to continue to demonstrate the value of engineering. We need to continue to demonstrate the value of engineering regulation to the public. And we know from our research here in BC that there's a very strong link between awareness of the profession and trust in the profession. And just lastly, as regulators, not only do we need to continue to uphold strong standards, we also need to support our professionals to be their best and do their best as they tackle the challenges of today and tomorrow.
Great. Thanks for getting it started, Heidi. And apologies on the introduction, but I'm just continuing a tradition I perform every night on television. And that is, I always make a mistake at some point during the course of the program, as the viewers always remind me once I get off the air. So I'm just being consistent in my ignorance. Let's put it that way. Jay, why don't you pick up the conversation from here, your vision for the future of the engineering license?
Yeah, following up on everything Heidi said, which is very true. I want to add that engineering is a very complex, integrated skill set. It is constantly evolving. Our skill sets need to adapt as we go along. And when we think of evolution, we might think of autonomous vehicles, robotics, and so on. As these evolve, so would things like artificial intelligence, 3D printers, cybersecurity, collision mitigation, green energy, virtual reality, and so on. In many areas, we need multidisciplinary groups of people. Engineering should not be an island. Many of our young engineering students who are planning for a 30 or 40-year career would probably work in areas that they haven't even envisioned yet. So we have to be ready. Look at 30, 40 years ago, we would have Fortran computers occupying huge rooms with engineering and computing students with cards punched to do that. Now a grade 2 kid with his or her iPhone has more capacity than the engineering student had, so not that long ago. So, and look at the James Webb telescope that we just launched. And it's going to orbiting 1.6 million kilometers from Earth, looking at the far edges of creation. How far have we come? And this is all engineering, but not just engineering, integrated, bright people with great enthusiasm. So in my view, engineering is there to stay, and it's strong. And maybe it's a bit of a stretch. Do we ask whether we need clean water and clean air? It's a given. I think engineering for the future is a given. Thanks, Steve.
Thank you, Jay. Christian Bellini, you're up next.
Sure, thank you. Great answers so far. Whatever the future of the engineering license, I think we have to keep in mind that the primary value proposition for both engineering and the public that they serve has to be the same, which is that licensed engineers are well-educated, experienced, abide by a code of ethics responsible for safeguarding life, health, and public welfare, and are accountable to a regulator. So under our current framework, our engineering license holders do make public protection their first priority, and they're held to this by the self-regulators such as ourselves and by our legislation and regulations and codes of ethics. And I think as we modernize and adapt our license, we have to keep these overarching principles in place. I think that there are still the fundamental underpinnings of what we do. However, how we regulate, and especially during a time when technology is expanding exponentially and new disciplines are popping up, we definitely do need a rethink of that. Licensing as it is today is at the level of the individual, and we assume that we can keep people safe by identifying a single point of responsibility when it comes to engineering work. I think this is a fair model for the design of buildings or civil infrastructure. I'm a structural engineer myself, and so I know that I feel well regulated by the profession. But modern engineering works comprise big teams working globally on large projects, which continuously evolve. So how do we apply that single point of responsibility to that model of licensing? And I think that that's where we need to broaden our thinking. So how do we adapt to this new way of working? How do we keep the public safe? We can look at industry approvals for products as opposed to holding individuals responsible. We can look at entity regulation. How do we regulate companies rather than just regulating individuals? Is having a single engineering regulator the answer, or is it somehow national, notwithstanding it being a provincial jurisdiction? How do we break it all down? In our current form, it's difficult to enforce licensure and exclusive rights to practice in a time when new disciplines and technologies are emerging regularly. So regulating engineering in this new environment will likely mean exploring new regulatory models, such as regulating entities or companies, and also other methods like that. I think the model focuses more on regulating the professional services in addition to regulating the individual professional, and requiring the entity or company or whatever group is working on the project to be accountable under the Act. But whatever regulatory model we adopt, it must be driven by the public. Because amid all the emerging disciplines creating new technologies, the public interest must remain paramount. Thank you.
Okay, Christian, thank you for that. Mark, just before you start your remarks, I'm going to ask you to, I think, answer the question everybody's thinking right now, which is, where are you? What is that background?
That is, I'm actually on the shores of Lake Superior near Puckasaw Park. That is the Eagle River mine. And so it doesn't look like that's right now. It's actually buried under about 3 meters of snow. We've had substantial snow this year, and it's a beautiful area of Ontario and Canada, and I'm lucky to be up here.
It sure looks it. Great. Okay, over to you, Mark, with your remarks.
So I thought about this question, and I'm going to address it from more of a what does it mean to me as an individual engineer? Because I am the president and chair of an advocacy body. So I look at it this way, and the answer to that is it depends. It depends where an individual is in their career. If they're a student or a recent graduate or an EIT, the P.Engs represent a goal, something they can achieve to, and they strive towards get. Another one, it depends on what industry they're involved in. As Christian said, he's very well regulated in structural engineering. I'm actually a geological engineer working in the mining industry. And each industry is quite different, whether you're in the electrical industries, the automotive industries. What that P.Eng means to you and how you apply the value of it depends on the industry. Another one, it depends on where you're educated from or gained your experience. We have international educated students that have come to Ontario and Canada to become P.Engs, and it gives them also a goal and a future career. It also depends on where they're in their career. I talked about students, but what about a young man that is starting with his family? The P.Eng is a secure career for him and a pathway forward to grow his his life and his family and have a good future. And then there's old fat white guys like me that are on the verge of retirement. And what does the P.Eng mean to me? It gives me the credibility that I can actually work with others to lobby for changes in our society and for improvement for our profession. And finally, it really depends on whether your discipline is even recognized or not right now. We have our traditional classical disciplines, but then there are new emerging disciplines, nanotechnologies, AI. These disciplines haven't quite been recognized yet. And so what the P.Eng means to them isn't as clear. It's something that we need to look at. But overall, what the P.Eng should mean to all of us is it gives us a credibility and provides us with the value that we can lead our society, we can grow our society, and we can prosper in our society. Remembering that the true mandate is to make sure everybody is safe. So thanks very much.
Thanks, Mark. You know, a bunch of words there that I hear that many of you have in common. The license needs to be relevant. It needs to be respected. It needs to be valued. I'm hearing safety. I'm hearing equity and so on. Heidi, pick up the conversation in as much as what you think regulators across the country need to do to ensure that those values, those adjectives I just mentioned, persist. What has to happen?
Well, I think that we need to communicate. We need to talk to people. We need to talk to our registrants. We need to talk to the public to help them understand the value of the license, and to then develop that trust within the profession.
Jay, what would you add to that?
I think, Steve, the licensed professional is something, when I look back at being a student, I wanted to put the P.Eng after my name. It's a thing of credibility, it's a thing of public safety, it's a thing of longevity to enhance society. And so those are the things that come to my mind.
Christian, what's your sense about how much the public knows when they see those letters after your name? Do they know what it means? Do they know what it represents?
I think that's an excellent question. I've often referred to the engineering profession as the invisible profession. And part of the reason for that is when engineering is working, you don't see it. And the only times that people's attention is drawn to engineering are the very rare occasions where the engineering fails, where a bridge falls down or something happens that where the engineering has not succeeded. So, you know, people encounter engineering every day of their lives from the moment they wake up, but they don't often think about it. They don't have an annual visit to their engineer the same way they do with their doctor. So it's harder to picture it that way. But that said, I think everybody is very well aware of what engineering and technology does for them as a society. I don't think that there's any question about that. It's really just a matter of how do we allow people to understand that when they feel safe walking into a building, or when they feel safe crossing a road or getting on a plane or picking up their phone, that it's engineering that's behind that. And the reason that they can trust it is because the individuals who are involved in that work are part of a regulated profession that follows a code of ethics. So I would hope that that is the message that people see when they see those letters, but I suspect that we still have a lot more work to go to really help the public understand all of that work that happens in the background behind what we do.
Well, let me find out from Mark how much work is still to be done. You know, the regulators have got a job here. Do you think they're on the right path to ensuring that those letters after your name continue to represent something respected and valued? You're on mute, Mark. I knew I'd have to say that at least once today.
There we go. I've actually won an award for that, so I'm very proud of being the person most likely to be on mute. So I can say that I agree with what Christian is saying, and the transformations that the PEO has been going through reflects this. But still, when I look at where we are for the P.Eng, and I'm looking more at the individuals that are trying to become P.Engs, is they need to have a better roadmap, I guess you would call it, and understand the length of time it's going to take to acquire a license, and have a better understanding of consistent standards and definitions of what engineering truly is. And that's something I think we have across Canada, is we haven't really defined as regulators and advocates of what is engineering. What does engineering mean? And that's something that maybe as a group that we can work together on. And last of all, they need a fair playing field. Are the same rules across the nation applied to how to become a P.Eng? When you're a P.Eng in Ontario, does that mean you're an equitable P.Eng to BC, that you're an equitable P.Eng to Newfoundland? And I think we're fairly close because of the fundamental foundations we have across the country, but there are some differences. So I hope I've answered your question.
Indeed. And maybe I can get Heidi, since she's not from Ontario, to pick up on that. When you see P.Eng Ontario versus P.Eng BC, do you think they're the same thing?
I wouldn't say that they're the same thing. Each regulatory body has their own legislation that they need to work off of. I do think that, the fundamental pieces for us to designate someone with a license and provide them that obligation is, we look at education requirements, we look at experience requirements, we look at character requirements. I think all the regulatory bodies look at those when they identify whether a person can and should get a license. And we also look to get references from people who those applicants have asked have worked for, to ensure that we validate their experience and their education. So I would say that we follow the similar processes, but what the public can see is that when someone has a designation of professional engineer, that they know that they have gone through some rigorous process and that they're at a level of standard in terms of their ability to do it.
Okay, I have questions, of course, that I'm going to put to you all, but then I'm also getting questions on my iPhone here from some of the people who are watching this, and I'll mix those in as we go along. And here's one here. The current P.Eng license is one size fits all. Do we need regulation of declared areas of practice to be relevant, respected? Christian, you want to come in on that?
Yeah, I can certainly try. I'm sort of two minds on this. On the one hand, I can see some advantages to the clarity of what the P.Eng means if it's identifies a specific discipline. But I think that doesn't necessarily fit the world that we live in right now. And engineering is an extremely broad and rapidly evolving career or area. And it's very difficult to sort of pigeonhole people into specific disciplines. And there's an awful lot of jobs. I think there's probably as many engineering jobs as there are licensed engineers in Canada. They're all different, some of them cross disciplines. I think that we would be probably moving backwards if we tried to take the P.Engs and divide them into individual disciplines. I think what we need to do instead is find a way to move forward to identify where that engineering is happening, what projects have engineering in them, and find a way to identify who it is who's working on them and taking responsibility, whether it be an individual or, as I mentioned earlier, whether it be a group or an entity, so that we have a way of pinpointing the responsibility for protecting the public interest that way, rather than trying to individually pigeonhole licensed engineers.
Okay, Jay, what's the view from Alberta on that?
Yeah, my view, Steve, is that all professional engineers have standards and ethics. We all signed an ethics document that we will work in our area of expertise, that we will be respectful of others and so forth. And we are self-regulating profession. So we owe it to each other to keep our colleagues online and talk to them if they are offline or complain about them so that the regulatory agency can look at it. We have an obligation to do continuous professional development to keep up. We need to have supervision if we are young and we are learning. We need to have mentorship for the young and up and coming people. We have to have a multifaceted approach to holding each other accountable for the most safe practice. So that's our obligation. And therefore, as things change, we are more able to, the schools, the universities can change, we can get more trained, we can get more supervision and mentorship and keep moving with time.
Mark, do we have that multifaceted approach right now? The questioner seems to think it's a bit of an issue.
If you look across the country, I would say, and I went back to this, is do we have a fair playing field? And I say, no, we don't. It's Jay mentioned continuous professional development. Well, right now, it's not mandatory in Ontario. It will be January 1st, 2023. So that's a change. But the multifaceted approach is the way our profession has to go. I don't know how our regulations can encourage that type of collaboration. But for example, in the mining industry, you cannot do any projects anymore without multifaceted, looking from an environmental, social, governance, electrical engineering, mechanical, et cetera, and everybody needs to be at the table because, especially in mining, because you actually have to know how you're going to close your mine before you're even allowed to start it. So without a multifaceted, in some cases, multi-generational approach, you can't be successful. And that's the future of engineering, is the more people that are collaborating, the better the solution is going to be and the safer our public is going to be.
You know, the beauty of Zoom is that some of the people watching this let you know right away what they think about what you're saying. And Andrew Cornell, I saw him just had his thumbs up right there. So he seems to be pleased with that reaction of yours. Heidi, again, I want to go to you and maybe you could help us through the British Columbia situation here, because I gather, at least I've been told, that over the past year, or I guess a year ago, the Professional Governance Act came into force, replacing an old act. And the new act sets consistent standards for ethical principles, for duties, for responsibilities, introduces some new regulatory tools. And I guess I want to get your view on whether you think these tools improve public safety, improve the public's sense of confidence in engineering and geoscience. What's your take?
Yeah, that's a great question, Steve. So the PGA, as you mentioned, came into effect about a year ago. It was a major change for British Columbia, but a positive one. So prior to the PGA, we worked under an outdated legislation that was about 100 years old and had never been updated in its whole, very piecemeal. And we had a confusing dual mandate that asked us to protect the public interest first and foremost, but also to advocate for the interests of our registrants. And so what I call that is the association versus regulator continuum. And at some times, these two directives came into conflict. And under this old regulatory framework, it restricted how agile we could be when dealing with modern regulatory issues. And so in contrast with the PGA has introduced clarity, focus, and a strong framework that equips us to address today's challenges, specifically as a regulator. So one of the most significant changes for us has been the introduction of a few new regulatory tools that have been long missing from our regulatory toolbox. And that is the ability to regulate engineering and geoscience firms or companies, and to have mandatory continuing education requirements for our registrants. And so, you know, much like what Christian and Mark have been talking about. And so firms or companies, for example, have a fundamental influence on the practice of engineering. The PGA has enabled us to create a robust regulatory framework that's going to enhance public protection by introducing established standards of practice for all firms in professional engineering and geoscience. And so what this has done is enabled us as a regulator to enforce these standards through regular audits and to ensure compliance. And so while the significant changes have been a big change for us, the registrants, our staff, the government, the PGA has really provided us a path to become a stronger regulator to better protect the public of BC. And so it's been a positive change in my eyes.
Is there a sort of very strong consensus in your view that the current system is better than the previous one?
Well, I know from our staff and our council and the registrants who support our statutory committees, they all believe that this is much better for our future.
I don't know if this is a non-starter. Christian, maybe you could help me out with this, but usually when there's an attempt to bring something in provincial jurisdiction into a more national application, it tends to be a non-starter because everybody knows Quebec is not going to join in. Is that the same situation here?
Well, I'm not sure I would exactly classify it like that. I think what we have in Canada is that regulation of engineering, as with other professions, is at a provincial jurisdiction level. It's just where it is. It's defined that way, which means that we are always going to have our own legislation that guides the way that we work. Now, the key to it is there a way for us to all move towards harmonizing that legislation in such a way that the way that we regulate in each province is not that different from the way that it's done in neighboring provinces. And so that doesn't necessarily mean to say that we suddenly have to come around to agree to one very specific way of doing things, but we need to be moving in that direction. And I think that we have tried more than once, and Engineers Canada, who's here today, will agree with this. You know, we've tried to push this harmonization train on a few occasions, and it has run into difficulty. And I wouldn't single out any given single province. And if, in fact, if I had to single one out, it would probably be our own. You know, there has certainly been resistance to that idea, but I think that we've got to overlook it, because I think that if we think about engineering as the profession in the way that the public looks at us, which is, I think, the view that we should be taking. We shouldn't be taking the view of us as engineers looking out to the world. We should think about how people look at us. If we think about it that way, and if we think about the globalized world that we live in, then, you know, I'd extend that thinking to say, I can't imagine that somebody from some other part of the world who's about to come and do business here in Canada would think for a moment that there'd be a difference in an engineer who is licensed in Ontario versus an engineer licensed in the Yukon or one who's licensed in BC. It would be a ridiculous thought to them to think that I'm getting a different product depending on which province I go to. And so I think it's incumbent upon us as the regulators of this profession to make sure that as we change and adapt, that we move in the same direction. And if we're doing anything that that moves us further apart, then we're actually harming the profession. And I think it's really, really important for us to keep that in mind as we move forward. But we're all having opportunities now to do some refreshing. I mean, BC has a new act, which is which Heidi was just saying they're quite happy with. There's legislative change happening in other provinces, and we're going to be looking at our legislation as well based on some recent decisions by our provincial government. So the opportunities are there for us to move together as opposed to moving apart.
Mm-hmm. And just to be clear, I wasn't being critical of Quebec, but the fact is that Quebec likes to go its own way on many of these things. I know a lot of people have been trying to put a national securities regulator together for going on 4 or 5 decades now, and it's it's not going to happen because Quebec doesn't want in. But Jay, maybe you could pick up the story there. Do you think Alberta in the mood to lead a more national effort to see a more harmonious approach?
Definitely. I think the mere fact that we have, Engineers Canada and the 12 regulators are part of it. In fact, we work with them very closely. The CEOs of all of the regulators work with each other to make sure that we don't have a weak link where somebody can enter the country because it's easy to get registered in province X and then move to province Y sort of thing. So there's a lot of harmonization. But each province also keeps moving the bar in a way with, like Heidi said, BC bringing their new legislation, Alberta's government planning to bring some new legislation. Because we are provincial bodies, we have that to contend with, but we still can work with each other to make sure that nationally we are harmonized and we have common areas that we can work with, identify weak links, try to help each other. We are a very cooperative group. If one of our constituent association needs help, the rest of us are right there willing completely to help out. So that's very encouraging.
Mark, can I get your view on that, on the more national / harmonious approach to this thing? I mean, Christian, I think, has got to be right about this. If somebody from Dubai is looking at work happening in Canada, they're not asking themselves, now I wonder if this person got sanctioned by, Yukon or Prince Edward Island versus Canada. So what's your thinking on this?
Well, it's from a personal experience, and it's changed now, but when I was a young engineer, I actually lived in Saskatchewan, and I got my P.Eng in Saskatchewan. And then I had it for, I think, 1 month short of 5 years. And I moved to Ontario, and it wasn't transferable. I actually had to rewrite some exams. You had to be 5 years as a P.Eng. So that
how'd you feel about that?
I almost went into teaching, to tell you the truth. I was very upset. But I understood it was coming out of Toronto when the world revolves around Toronto. We know that because I live in the north now. So, but I think I've been sitting on a working group for changes to the Professional Engineering Act in Ontario. And there are certain minimal standards that each regulatory body has put in place, and it's getting very consistent across the country. I actually recently held P.Eng in Newfoundland, Manitoba, and Ontario. And the nice thing is I always did my CPD in Manitoba because they were actually the hardest, the strictest. And then it was easy just to transfer the records over to Newfoundland and Ontario. So there is a very important that nationally we do get that consistent. So when you do have internationally educated engineers looking for an entrance point, it's going to be a fair playing field no matter what jurisdiction they come into.
Gotcha. Christian, let's look inside the guts of your organization for a moment here, if we can, because I think I've been told in 2018, your organization voluntarily commissioned an independent external regulatory performance review. And now I gather you are looking at those recommendations. So let me ask, what specific measures PEO is going to put in place, or maybe should put in place, to become the truly modern regulator that serves and protects the public interest?
Yeah, thanks, Steve. Yeah, that was one thing that we did proactively back in 2018 to really get a sense of where we stood as a regulator and how we were performing. And we have been working to address the issues that came up in that report ever since. Just to give you an idea of some of the steps that we've taken so far, one of them is that we have adopted the National Professional Practice Examination, which is already in use amongst most of the Canadian regulators, to replace our own exam, which with a psychrometrically balanced exam based on ethics, professional practice, and engineering law. We're also joining our fellow regulators, we've heard this already, in implementing mandatory continuing professional development program in early 2023 that's based on our existing voluntary practice evaluation and knowledge program. The mandatory program will help ensure that our engineers can meet standards of learning and professional competence and conduct that are appropriate for the engineering services that they provide. We're also taking a look at our existing 12-month Canadian experience requirement. So this 12-month experience requirement has been a common theme among the requirements for licensure across the country, but we've all been looking at it for various reasons. In Ontario, it's particularly timely because the provincial government has just now passed new legislation that would ask us to eliminate that requirement. So while it's a requirement of our current work, we're exploring the basis for why it's there, how it serves to protect the public, and how it might be modified to balance the interests of license applicants, including those who are foreign trained, with public safety, because there's a balance there. You know, that a lot of the drive behind eliminating the Canadian experience requirement at the provincial level is really in support of facilitating licensure of foreign educated engineers as they come to Canada, because the 1-year Canadian work experience is seen rightly so as a barrier. But then we also have to balance public safety. We have to find where is the line between those two things. How does that work for us? On a more sort of operational level, we're working to digitize our licensing processes to better and faster application licensing processing times. And that is another thing that's actually going to be dictated to us by the current legislation that's passed in Ontario, where we will be required to commit to processing times. And then finally, and this sprung out of a separate piece of work after the regulatory review, is we created an anti-racism and anti-discrimination exploratory working group to develop recommendations on how best to address the issues of racism and discrimination and systemic discrimination in all aspects of our work as a regulator, as an organization, as well as an employer. So we have the results of that initial scoping study. It was a risk scoping study, and we're now moving to the next stage, which is to put together a code that we'll be implementing to be able to address issues of systemic racism and discrimination in the organization. So those are a few of the things that we've been working on. It has been a real time of change for us, because at the same time as this has been going on, we've been doing an organizational reorganization as well on our staff side. So we are going to emerge from this with a really renewed structure under our feet. But certainly a lot of things are under change right now.
Okay. Apropos of the comments you made at the end there, and then I go back to Farzad's opening speech that he gave, in which he talked about a more equitable profession as well.
Yeah.
Let me spend a moment on that. Heidi, talk about that if you would, and whether the profession is where it needs to be on that scale.
In simplest terms, Steve, we are not where we need to be. And one of the things that Engineers Canada has in terms of a campaign is a 30 by 30 campaign for 30% of women in newly licensed females in the profession by 2030. And I will say, you know, when we talk about harmonization, or at least coming together as a nation, it is one of the things that we have come together on as regulators. Many of the regulators are champions of the 30 by 30 campaign. We here in BC have about 23% of our registrants as who identify as female in our registrant base. So some of the work that we all need to do is really on ensuring that when we're working with young people who could potentially see STEM as their career or their profession, is to really have them see themselves in the people that are professional engineers. And so role modeling, mentoring, when we have STEM events here in BC, we have our science games. And we need to ensure that there is good representation of women, men, people of different backgrounds to be seen there, so that they can say, hey, you know what, I might be able to become an engineer. So there is a bit of work there. Here in British Columbia, we just launched our guideline in December, our Equity, Diversity, Inclusion Guideline. That we have for our registrants, now our individual registrants as well as our company registrants, on how to create that environment that is really nurturing of equity, diversity, and inclusion. We have a lot of work to go, not just in BC, but I think across all the nation related to the profession to continue to uphold that.
Right. That's the old expression, if you can see it, you can be it. And I guess, Jay, I should follow up with you. Do you see enough people out there who look like you during the course of your doing your daily responsibilities?
So at APEGA, our staff really is a very diverse group of people, which we are very proud about. And we have taken equity, diversity, and inclusion very seriously. And we are proud that we initiated the 30 by 30, which is now a national program. We are proud of that. And in the equity, diversity, inclusion, we had a $350,000 grant from women from the federal government to talk about women in engineering. We did some in-person and online interviews and a lot of work over 3 years, and just published a document that I've been circulating to my colleagues. And also the success of that has given us another $400,000 grant from the federal government to do more work. During the COVID, we realized that women somehow paid a higher price in terms of what they had to do, or their work, or childcare, and so on. And so there are issues that we can't pay lip service to this. We have to do the work. We have to get our registrants, like we have 4,700 permit holders in Alberta. We try to engage them. We try to disseminate information to them. We take a lot of pride in this, both internally in terms of how our staffing is, but also as a province, we want to make sure that we impart what we learn to our permit holders.
Mark, you told a joke earlier about the old fat white guys, and and I think you didn't need to, but I think you pleaded guilty on that score. But
Oh yeah.
well, I don't from where I'm sitting, you don't need to. But the question I've got for you is, do you think the profession is open enough to people who are not older and whiter and maler to join it?
It has become, and I say that coming from an industry that is traditionally been male. And the importance that I learned very early in my career as an engineer is the more diverse individuals you have sitting at the table, the better your solution is going to be. It might not come out easy at times, and you might pull your hair out like I have, obviously, trying to understand other individuals' perspective. So I see engineering now as open field, and I myself, I try to champion as diverse individuals as I can. I mentor quite a few people. A lot of them are females. A lot of them are foreign educated, and just are right here in Westdome, up in Wawa area. There is 13 different countries represented in our employees here. And it's fantastic. I've seen the mining industry grow this way, and I think the engineering profession is actually growing quicker. And so I think the opportunity is there, and people are starting to see the role models they need. Her name slipped my mind, but the Dean of Engineering at University of Waterloo that recently passed away a couple of years ago is my son. We took him there for my 30th anniversary, and he saw her and was so impressed. He came home, and all of a sudden his marks got up into the 90s. And it doesn't have to be what your gender is or what your race is or anything. It's that you're inspiring. You show your curiosity, and you let other individuals see that. And that's what is going to do our profession the best to evolve it even more. It's make sure people understand you're curious and show them what you've been able to do. And it doesn't matter whether you're an old fat white male or like my boss, Haley, she's from Jamaica, and she's curious about everything, and it's great. And so I think our profession has really turned the corner in terms of equity, diversity.
Mark, as you were making that point, Jeanette Southwood put in the chat, which people can look at, an article about Pearl Sullivan, whom you are discussing, I presume.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so that's in the chat for people to look at. Jay, I see your hand is up. You wanted to follow up on that?
Yes, please, Steve. As I finished speaking, Fareen Ahmed put a question saying, what about men? Is this only happening to women in terms of equity, diversity, and inclusion? And so my response is right. He's correct. It includes men too, and that's why we are at APEGA, we are trying to look at unbiasing hiring processes, looking at unconscious biases, and it applies all across. What I spoke to Ahmed is, Fareed, is the 2 grants we got from the federal government, both pertain to women in the profession, and because we're also trying to grow to 30%, which obviously we should be getting to 50%, but at least get to 30%. That's why there was some extra effort on this, but you are right, it applies to everybody.
It's interesting you say you need to be getting to 50-50. And let me just follow up on that with you, Jay, for a second, because I presume you would need to get to 50-50 if as many women as men or men as women wanted to become engineers. Do we know whether that's in fact the case?
So, Steve, when you look at the demography and look at the baby boomers versus the current generations, you have far more women getting into the profession than the baby boomers. So there was a time when engineering was viewed as a male profession. Slowly, that's being broken down, and that's why the STEM courses and so on in high school is important, and that's why APEGA connects with K-12 and the universities, why we have Science Olympics and teacher awards and things like that to entice the bright and young minds at an early stage to think of engineering and geoscience as a viable future career.
Gotcha. Let me do one more question on this and then we'll move on. And that is, Heidi, I want to come back to you because, well, how do I put this? Are you I guess you're a double minority in your field in as much as you are a woman and you are an Asian Canadian. And I bet there are times when you go to meetings and you're the only person who's both a woman and both Asian at those meetings. And I wonder how you handle all that.
Thanks, Steve. And I'm going to have to correct you again for the second time. I am a professional engineer and I am not an Asian Canadian. I am an Asian immigrant to Canada. So, but I do happily call Canada my home and I am very proud Canadian. So how do we manage that? You know, as I grew up, my parents instilled in me a sense of pride of who I am. Me as an individual, regardless of my sex or my race, it's standing up for who you are. It's being confident of what you bring to the table. And it's about doing your best and doing your best to make a difference in our world. And so I just do what I do, you know, identifying what it is in a meeting that we need to accomplish and really going for it.
I think, Steve, if I may add a little to what Heidi said, she's the last of 9 children, so she's used to fighting for her rights from the very beginning. She's very capable.
Well, I know that.
Don't forget, I have a little brother that I was able to beat up on.
I know they've postponed the beginning of the baseball season today, but I still am concerned that 3 strikes and you're out, and I'm at 2 strikes already. So Heidi, I'm gonna try real hard not to make a 3rd strike and be kicked out of this whole thing. Let's go on here. Let's talk about technology. The engineering profession, like other professions, is facing disruptive change due to emerging technology. Christian, maybe you could start us off on this. The gaps that you're noting within regulation of professional engineering, because of this disruption. How are you meeting these challenges?
Well, we're still trying, that's for sure. There's a great article addressing this in one of PEO's engineering dimensions called PEO's Big Tent, the Emerging Disciplines Conundrum. And if anybody's interested, I'd encourage them to read it. It is on our website. The article includes viewpoints from some former PEO presidents, as well as academics and entrepreneurs. And I think it summarizes our regulatory gaps in the face of emerging disciplines, which is that the current definition of engineering in our act, and it's not that different from the definitions in the acts across the country, is so broad that it easily encompasses many newer areas of practice that are emerging as science, technology, and engineering evolve. So our act says, hey, you can regulate it all. it all falls under that. But the reality is we have a structure, a licensing structure that is very much built around this sort of traditional type of engineering that I do. So as a structural engineer, you hire me, I design you a building, the structure of a building, I put my stamp on it, that I'm the one who's responsible for all of the work that went on there, and then the building gets built. So that works really well for me. But when you're looking at massive engineering projects in AI or in nanotechnology that have contributors that are engineers, that are non-engineers, there's large fields of people that all work on them. You can't ask that group, that's working across the world, hey, pick one person and that person's going to be the one responsible for this work and we're going to hold you accountable. It just doesn't work that way. So I think that the shortcoming that we have right now with these emerging disciplines is to find what is the new way that we can take the public and protect them, give them the sense that the work that is being done, that they rely on in their day-to-day lives, is being done in a way that somebody is accountable, or something is accountable, or some way of feeling that safety and security, that it's not just some one-off idea that came out that somebody's trying out to see how it works, but that really there's standards, there's thought and responsibility that goes behind it. So that's where we are. How do we do that? And I'm going to be provocative here. I'm going to say, hey, as a regulator, PEO has one tool in its belt. It's called a license. If we need different tools, where are they going to come from? And how are we going to get them there? And really, and this is the one that's not going to win me any points from my fellow engineers, but is PEO the right organization for it? Is it something where actually maybe some of these things need to be, regulated by somebody else? I'm not saying that they are or they're not, but I'm saying these are the questions that we need to be asking ourselves right now. Because at the moment, our tool belt's pretty thin when it comes to anything outside of civil infrastructure and buildings. And that's really where we need to be thinking hard about how it is that we're going to protect the public. But as I mentioned earlier, I think that the way that we look at this is to stand in the shoes of the public and look in at our profession, not the other way around. We've had a good tradition of getting engineers in the room and saying, how are we going to do this better? But we need to involve the public. They're the ones who are actually the people that we're trying to protect. And we need to get that perspective so that we make sure that whatever it is that we evolve is evolving in the right way and is doing the thing that we want it to do.
Jay, can I get you on this? How is disruptive technology affecting your world?
So, yeah, I think, let me just think a little bit here. A lot of the things that happen, sometimes you don't have as much control. For example, autonomous vehicles I mentioned earlier, it's a federal responsibility. Aviation is a federal responsibility. And so when things happen in those worlds which have a lot to do with engineering, software, integrated approaches, and so forth, our own regulations don't give us the necessary leverage to join up and do things. So within the province, we try to do co-regulation to strengthen the public protection. For example, APEGA works with Alberta Municipal Affairs, with the Safety Codes Council, with Occupational Health and Safety. We have some MOUs with them so that we can help each other out and therefore protect the public more. But when it comes to legislation and things that are national and provincial, I think there are some gaps that we need to fill, and they are not easy to fill because somebody needs to take charge of it and forge ahead. So some areas are difficult, Steve, while others we are making headway.
Mark, how about you on that?
Well, it's what I'm afraid of is we do too much regulation, that you tend to, you might run the risk of regulating out innovation if it becomes so regulated that you can't release new products. I actually, in my career, I kind of represented emerging technology in the early 80s. I started doing numerical modeling of underground mine design, which was fairly new, rock mechanics. And the advances that I was involved in over the next several years was tremendous, to now that everybody does it. You have to do it now to make sure that your mine design, because unlike Christian, who his structural design are very well known properties of steel and the concrete's going to do this, and we can run into situations that 10 feet into the rock, it might totally change. And if you don't have a drill hole that goes through it, you don't know that change is going to occur. So you get into probabilistic and all these different techniques to be able to tell. So it's important that the P.Eng license always reminded me that what I was doing was to protect other people. And so the research and the innovations I worked on with others was I always made sure they had a basis in reality. I didn't just do this model and say, oh, that's truth, that's reality. No, I made sure I constantly improve that. And so I see, as we regulate, we don't want to regulate out innovation, but we want to make sure that the individuals that are doing it have that basis in reality, and that the P.Eng reminds them that our mandate is to protect people. So someone said, let's one-off, let's try this and then put it out and see what happens. Well, no, we can't do that. And the P.Eng reminds me of that.
Gotcha, Mark. Heidi, do you want to come in on that? Talk about how technology is disrupting your world?
Yeah, thanks, Steve. I'm going to change the disruption narrative to something else. So it's not just technology that can be disruptive. As you all know, here in BC, we had a disruption that happened to us in the fall. We had a very destructive atmospheric river event that had happened that killed 5 people and damaged our agricultural industry and our infrastructure. It was a catastrophic event. So, you know, when we think about engineering and how engineering needs to change, with us in terms of infrastructure, as an example, it's not just about building infrastructure using a hazard-based approach anymore. It's about building for resilience. Possibly we could use a different type of approach, maybe a risk-based approach, and evaluating different levels of acceptable risk for our future. And maybe that's what we should be doing because the world is changing, the climate is changing, and our professions need to adapt to that.
You know, I can't believe we're 70 minutes into this thing and one word and one number has not come up yet. So we better do it now. The word is COVID. The number is 19. I'm surprised we haven't talked about it yet, but let's get into it now. And Christian, maybe you can start us off on this. We have seen in so many other sectors in society, be it the justice system with the courts or the prison system, or the service industries, certainly cultural industries, everybody's been affected by COVID-19 in a different way. I'm wondering how your profession has been affected by COVID-19 and whether the pandemic has accelerated any of the changes to the engineering license that you either want to see or don't want to see happen.
That's a great question. I'll flip my company hat on for a second and tell you that as a company, as a structural engineering design firm, we met early on in the pandemic, and we had this sort of hunker down mentality. We're like, how are we going to weather this storm when everything slows down? And what ended up happening was the exact opposite. We never slowed down. In fact, works kept on going, and we got busier as time went on. So I would say from our particular discipline of engineering, which is basically structural design for buildings, we saw almost no impact. The things that did happen was that construction sites, I'm going to tell you, have become more safety conscious than they were before in terms of infection spread, but that sort of had knock-on effects to other things too. There's more orientations and that sort of thing happening when you get onto one of those sites. From our point of view in the office, we learned that you can design buildings in your living room just the same way that you can in the office. So that didn't have a big impact on us. So that's from a company point of view. Now, from a regulator point of view, I would say PEO was caught a little flat-footed on this one. We were a largely paper-based organization that does a lot of processing of applications through paper. And when we had to send everybody home from the office, a lot of that work slowed down to a halt or to a very slow move. So we did actually fall well behind what we should have been doing and develop big backlogs of processing as the pandemic emerged. But the good news out of it was that it catalyzed an effort on our part to digitize and to move a lot of paper-based operations to electronic-based operations, to move a lot of processing that had to happen in a physical space to online. And so I would say that we're going to emerge from this stronger in that regard. We talked for a long time about the importance of digitizing our processes, but we never had a real push, and COVID-19 was the push. It really pushed us into that. And I can say now that we've found our feet, we've tackled those backlogs and worked a lot of them down. So that's good news. But it's work that we should have been doing all the way along. So how has it affected us? I think it's made us better from a digital, operating as a digital organization point of view. And as an industry, certainly in the buildings industry anyway, I don't think it had a big impact on the economy of how we were operating.
P.Eng, can I get you on that?
You bet. Thanks, Steve. Yeah, we faced the same pain points when COVID first started. We were also a very paper-based system. But in 48 hours, we had everyone working from home, and our information systems department did a fabulous job of getting everyone set up so that we can work at home. And we've proved over the last 2 years that we can effectively do that. And so from a regulatory work perspective, what we ended up doing, in line with what Christian was saying related to exams, we ran a very successful pilot here. The exams were typically done paper-based, and we were able to move those exams online. So we ran a pilot. It allowed us to keep our regulatory processes running, especially in the early stages of the pandemic. And it continues to be a part of us for now. PEO came on board, as did APEGA. We partnered with them, and our first exams included 160 engineering and geoscience subjects. And we had over 900 candidates go through spring and summer 2021. And so we were able to take a big challenge, not only for BC, but also for the nation, and flip it and allow us to continue to move regulation and the process of licensure forward.
Jay, we've got a question here on the chat. How do we enforce provincial licenses in a virtual world? Has COVID made that more difficult?
In a way, yes, it had, but we also pivoted as we sent staff home. By looking after staff's health first, our productivity actually went higher. So for example, when we did some of our practice reviews, which used to be on site with the permit holder in question, we pivoted to doing some initial online work on looking at the company, looking at their professional practice plans, and then escalating. So we went to a risk-based assessment. We did from reviewing 20, 30, 40 permit holders a year, we moved up to about 190 by putting in a risk-based process, which we had kind of begun to look at how to do more reviews, but the COVID situation and isolation speeded up some of these risk-based activities. We too, on the National Professional Practice Exam, went to virtual exams for 11 of the 12 of our colleagues. And I believe we did about 8,000 exams last year, all very successfully. So there are lots of success stories, but there were also, because the oil prices at the beginning of the COVID was down in Alberta, and then COVID also further impacted the economy. In Alberta, we had quite a lot of job losses in the oil and gas sector, which impacted many of our members. Some of them retooled and moved into other areas, but slowly the economy has come back. And right now we are probably in better shape than when COVID started.
Mark Frayne, in your world, COVID-19's impact?
Decreased our travel budget significantly. And it made CPD much easier. The one thing that it did do to us, and to let you understand this, I'm actually in camp right now. It's the mining industries that and other industries that work remotely. You'll be away. Some people are 2 weeks in, 2 weeks out. I'm 7 and 7 right now. I'm running a 4 days in, 3 days out. And the thing that COVID did was, by improving the way we communicate through Zoom and Teams, it also introduced burnout, because even when I was off, I'm not off. I get those calls, I get those mandatory meetings. It's really become difficult, and that's something that not with just professional engineers, but I find more engineers are burning out than usual, because we tend to take things on. We care. We want to solve problems, right? And it's really hard to not do that. So I would say COVID has also introduced a mental health issue in our profession.
And how do you deal with it?
Me?
Or anybody?
LCBO? No.
Glass of wine at the end of the day is a big help for a lot of people, for sure.
Yeah. It's recognizing you've got into that vicious spiral, and making sure that you help others recognize it too. So you do disconnect, and you do make sure that your family life and your mental health is good, because without it, the work you do for your employer isn't going to be that good, and you're going to start making mistakes. So in essence, COVID has really brought forward, and I think we'll hear more and more over the next little bit, is mental health, and how we address that as a profession and as a society.
That's been a huge issue for so many sectors in so many professions and occupations, to be sure. We haven't heard the last of that. I'm just keeping an eye on the clock here, friends, and I think we've got time for one more round on a question that's come in on the chat here. It says, many challenges facing the regulators are rooted in a weak definition of the practice of professional engineering under the legislation. Do the panelists agree that a meaningful future for the P.Eng license requires a new, clear, objective definition of professional engineering? Okay, let's go around on that. Christian, start us off.
Oh, I would agree that that our definition is more of our problem than it is our solution right now. I think that I alluded to this earlier, but the definition, particularly in Ontario, is super broad. You know, it captures just about everything. And so what it does is it gives the public the impression that we are actually regulating all of that stuff. And the reality is that we're not. You know, we're regulating the parts of engineering that we have the tools for very well. And we're having a shot at regulating some of those other areas, but it's pretty hit and miss, I would say, at this point. So what would changing the definition do? I mean, one thing that it would do is it would allow us to bring more focus to what we do. It would also allow us to identify the areas where we are actually not that effective. And it would force us and the government, because the government creates our legislation where the definition exists. It would force us all to sit down and say, okay, well, how are we going to actually take action to regulate these other areas where there is a public interest? And I think that conversation, it's going to have to be a dialogue. Hasn't happened yet in earnest anyway with our provincial governments, but it needs to. And I think that you know, the catalyst for that discussion would be that engineering definition. And if we could come up with something that more closely identified what we do, but then also identified what it is that needs to happen, then I think that we'll be way further ahead. And it's also circular. Lots of people point this out. Our engineering definition in Ontario actually refers to engineering principles. So how do you define that?
Jay, you want to pick up on that?
Sure, Steve. I think the field is so vast that I would disagree that we could do justice with a definition because it's constantly growing, constantly expanding. We have to stay nimble, and a definition won't do. And because we are coming to the end, Steve, if I might deviate a little, I think it's our professional ethics. And when I think of professional ethics, I can't think of any better example of Alan MacDonald, who was worked for Morton Thiokol during the January 27, 1986 space shuttle launch at Cape Canaveral, where the overnight temperature went below -5 degrees, and they have to certify the flight and everybody, because there's so much pressure from NASA and government and everybody, they signed off, whereas Alan MacDonald refused to because his professional ethics said it wasn't safe. And he was punished. They tried to force him. He wouldn't. And we know what happened to Space Shuttle Challenger. So our profession is driven by personal ethics, and this personifies that. So I wanted to throw that in.
Gotcha. Heidi, let me get you on this too, if I could.
Yeah, I think, you know, there's the definition of the practice of engineering that regulators need to align to. There's a definition of the practice of engineering that the public needs to align to. And I don't think that those are well understood. They're not the same. You know, when we look at regulation and the way in which we define it, I think it's, I'm going to say, way more technical than the general public can understand. And so I think that is where the opportunity lies, is how do we firstly inside our regulatory bodies, inside our registrants, define engineering, the practice of engineering, and how can we get ourselves aligned to what that is? And then how do we help the public understand what that is? Because if they don't know what it is, how are they going to evaluate whether we're protecting the public and that they can trust us? So I think it's about helping people understand and doing it at a level that makes sense.
Gotcha. Mark, your turn, please.
I look at it kind of very simple, ignoring the regulation part of it. Is I look going back into my early days in designing mines. I had to become very risk aware with an ultimate goal of zero harm. So I can put a definition on engineering. Are individuals or professionals that have become ultra risk aware. They think through multiple contingencies, and their ultimate goal is zero harm, whether to individuals or to the environment or whatever they don't want to detrimentally impact. So that's how I think we could go from there, instead of looking at definition of what engineering is calculating this, and this. Ultimately, those are tools that we are trying to reduce risk, assess risk, and produce a zero harm situation.
Okay. I think I have the pleasant task right now of handing it off to Sandro Peruzza, who's going to come in here and close this thing off. But I've been watching the chat very carefully while this thing has been going on, and I do have to give props to one person before I do that. And that is Albert. You are prolific as hell, my friend. Oh my goodness, you are really in there. I guess you all know who Albert is. I don't know who he is, but he's made a lot of comments in the chat, a lot of them very interesting, and he's prolific as heck. So well done, Albert. Good for you. And Sandro, I pass the microphone over to you now.
Thank you, Steve. Great job as always with moderating. You've made this conversation very lively, and whenever you can get engineers talking about engineering in the future of the profession and the future of the license, I think is a very lively conversation, not just on screen, but also in the chat. Thank you also to all our panelists for a great discussion and all their insights. Heidi, Jay, Christian, and Mark, thank you all for providing your experience, your knowledge, and your insights into the conversation, and for challenging each other as well. I know we're all colleagues, and we wanted to keep it friendly, but it was great to have that conversation. And thank you to all of you for joining us tonight to kick off National Engineering Month 2022. I'm going to take an opportunity as well to thank my staff, the staff at the Ontario Society of Professional Engineers, for organizing this event and working behind the scenes. I know they were feverishly typing questions to send to you, Steve, and moderating the chat as well. And again, a very special thank you to all the NEM partners that we have on the slide. National Engineering Month in Ontario, for those that don't know, is administered by OSPI, but really through our partners, and we can't do any of this without the financial and other support from them. So thank you all. Take an opportunity to go to the website nemontario, all one word, .ca, to sign up for events and workshops taking place all month long in the province, as well as explorengineering.ca. See what is happening right across this great country of ours. Well, with that, thank you again, everyone. Have a great evening and take care.
Thanks, everybody. Bye-bye.
Hi, everyone.
Thank you.
Thanks, everybody.
Everybody.
Glad Steve got away with only 2 strikes. I almost knocked Steve out. I was worried.